Our questions, I have marked at least on page number 6. Page number 6, and we made our way down to actually the beginning of this little section D, which Solomon is talking about the insufficiency of wealth. And of course, as is the case throughout these first few chapters, we know that the things that we read Solomon saying, it is accurate that Solomon is saying what he's saying, but just because Solomon is saying what he's saying doesn't mean that what he's saying is true, okay? Because he's making these observations estranged from God. He's making these observations in a position where he does not have, at this point in time, the hope of eternity in heaven. He doesn't possess the favored relationship of a child of God because he's not living in accordance with God's will. And so in his pursuit of happiness and fulfillment and satisfaction through all of these different areas in which we oftentimes are tempted as well to try to find satisfaction, he sees and he says, this is no good. It'd be better off not even live to have to deal with this kind of stuff. Well, of course, that's a perverted view, but it is the only view if you kick God out of the picture. It's the only view if you don't consider that God has given us instruction in his word as to how to live in life. Then no wonder people are disgusted to the point of giving up. And no wonder so many people will end up sometimes even killing themselves because the world is so terrible. Because they don't possess hope. They don't have God. And so they're in a pitiful position. And one of the reasons why I think that this particular book is included, because if a person like Solomon, of all people, with the advantages that he had available to him, I mean, he's a wise man. He's got the ability financially to buy anything he sets his mind to, and even says that. He doesn't keep from himself anything that he wants. Anything that he desires, he can get it. But then he draws a conclusion after he's got all this stuff, it's all like grasping after the wind. It's all a fruitless endeavor that I'm engaged in here. And of course, if he could get in that position, then certainly we could, because I ain't never claimed to be smart as Solomon of you. Well, of course not. But yet, just because he possessed all of this wisdom doesn't mean that God overrode his free moral agency and he had to act and speak correctly all the time, because he didn't. And we've done shown that to be the case here. Now, obviously, it's going to get a whole lot better at the end of the book. But at this juncture, he's looking at all the different areas in which he himself has sought to find happiness and fulfillment. It's not there. It's not in all these 1,000 women. Now, just that one point right there. Reckon people in the world today would look upon the idea of having 1,000 different partners in the sexual relationship. That'd be heaven on earth. Well, Solomon says it ain't. And he can say that by experience because he'd been there and he'd done that. And he said that's not what it was. It wasn't in wine and women and song where happiness was found, where true fulfillment was found. And of course, we wish that people would use the sage advice of Solomon at the end of this book more so than they do presently, because obviously our world is afflicted with we're nothing more than educated animals disease, and thus if we act like barnyard animals, then that's what we're supposed to do according to evolutionary theory, which of course is wrong as wrong can be. So we get down here to verse number 8 through 20 of Ecclesiastes chapter 5. And in this little section, he's beginning to ponder the oppression that exists of poor people and the injustice that exists in society. Is it a common thing among humanity that poor people sometimes are oppressed and that there's injustices that go on? Well, of course, it did in the days of Solomon. It does today. It always will be that way. That the people are in the most peculiar position as being unable to defend themselves are oftentimes the very ones who are on the receiving end of punishment and oppression, sadly, because they can't do any better. You know, the idea that if you've got enough money, then you can hire the very best lawyer that can get you out of any crime that you commit. But the problem is the poor man doesn't have the money to hire that lawyer. And so for almost nothing, he can be oppressed. Justice is thrown out the window. And he ends up serving time, not because he's any more guilty than the rich person, but because he couldn't hire a lawyer. Well, we know that's the case. You very seldom see rich people not extending or pushing to a future date a decision on a crime they've committed it just goes on and on and on and on. And as Solomon rightly observes, since that is the case, it's not right. And I can see that it's not right. You know, at some point in time, though, you'd figure that Solomon will look at himself and says, well, what am I doing to rectify this situation here? You know, I am actually the king, so I could make some changes here to make things a little bit better. But that doesn't ever seem to come through here. Now, maybe he does. Maybe he does seek to establish justice in positions of power, but obviously he still sees it exist because of the flaw of humanity. Anything you got humanity in, it's going to be subject to being out of whack with what God would have it to be, and such we see that to be the case here. So, somebody begin reading at verse 8 and read through verse 20, please. I know that's a large section to read, but if you don't do it, I'll have to, so you need to. Now, obviously, there are 47 different things in that context that we could spend a whole lot of time talking about and accomplish much good, obviously. But in trying to simply hit some of the high points and draw some applications for our present usage, then we sort of have to limit it down. But there's a lot of material there. And some of the things he said is right on target, But we got to be able to distinguish between the things that he said that's right on target and the things that he says he's estranged from God. Some of them have application both ways, but others don't. So let's be careful and make sure that we do that. So here is, would you say that probably the plight of the poor person has always been something that good-hearted people have always thought about and sought to find a remedy to, and maybe even assist themselves best they can? Well, I think that's common human nature it is. And of course, when that's lacking, then you have to question the character of the individual that it's lacking in. You know, when you see people that don't have sufficient stuff to meet their daily needs, then it bothers you. You don't like to see starving young'uns, you know. You don't like to see poor kids go to school and the only time they get a decent meal to eat is at school. You don't like to see that, you know. I've told you about one little old boy in Tammy's 4th grade years and years ago, and he just refused to express himself. He refused to change the expression on his face. He just was always in just a same mode. And she noted that the poor fellow was wearing the same clothes every day. Now, I do that myself, but I wash them in between. But I've got 3 pairs of clothes, and that's all I wear. But got a full closet, but I don't like most of the stuff in there. But here he was wearing the same stuff every day, and he wasn't getting to wash it at night. And so it got there, and this went out the whole first semester, and she would try to kid with him and break him out of his shell and everything. Well, anyhow, around the end of the year, she got his sizes, and we went up to Walmart and got him a bunch of clothes, and we went to take it to where he's living. And where he was living in a trailer, but the trailer didn't have any running water, didn't have any electricity. And this was in like dinner time, and his mom and daddy was drunk as a skunk at midday. And this poor little boy, and he had a sister too that was older than him, but here he was in that situation. Now, the parents had put themselves in that position to a great extent, but look at who's suffering for it. The poor kids are. They're the ones that are doing without. They're the ones that can only be happy is when they're at school, when they have their needs taken care of. They got a clean place to eat, go to the bathroom, you know, and got something to eat. When they have that at home. So that is certainly something that we should acknowledge as being a problem, because God acknowledges that being a problem. I mean, what about some of the rules and regulations that God gave the children of Israel? If somebody was in need, it didn't matter whether they was a Jew or not, then you helped them as best you could. And remember that famous woman by the name of Ruth, what was she doing in a field when a fellow by the name of Boaz caught her eye? She's gleaning the corners. What's that all about? Well, they were required in their abundance of field with grains or whatever to leave the corners so that the poor people could come in there and get it. See, God was making provisions for people to take care of themselves that way if they just simply get. Nowadays, they just starve to death. Say, bring that stuff over in the corner over to me, and while you're at it, break the beans, and I want them all that size, and if you could cook them, I'll eat them. Sadly. But that should cause us problems, and it did here. Solomon says, I looked at the world, and poor people are being taken advantage of. There's dishonesty and injustice that abounds. This ain't right. Pooey on the world. Well, it's not helping anything. That's simply making an observation. And if that's all there was to life, then you might start a tax-exempt organization and start feeding the poor. Well, people's done that, haven't they? Well, sure they have. You know? But yet we're told that in the United States of America today, 1 in 5 people in the United States of America is food, what's it called? Food what? Deprived. In other words, they're going to bed hungry. Well, of course, I've got grandkids. They go to bed hungry right after they got done eating supper, you know. But that's not what we're talking about here. We're talking about people who are starving, literally, because they don't have adequate resources to eat. So that should give us a problem. This is should be a burden that we see, that we ought to try to do something about the best that we can. And notice what Solomon says. He says, don't marvel. In other words, don't be amazed at this happening, because it always has and really always will. I mean, it's just the way things are. Did not Jesus say, the poor you have with you always? You know? Well, why would he say that? It's probably because the poor will you have with you always. That's probably why he said it. So there's always going to be those who have less resources than other people. But keep in mind as well that in the United States of America, a poor person sometimes has 2 cars, a boat, and electricity, a microwave, indoor plumbing, but as far as the standard goes, they're classified as being poor. That's another point for another time. So the first question then, who watches over the high officials in this scenario that he's picturing? Higher officials. Oh, so you got, and of course he uses the term in a province, okay? So that could be taken to be a smaller section of the country. So here's a province in which poor people are being taken advantage of, they're being oppressed, and injustice exists in this province. Well, it just might be that there are a bunch of provinces, and so there's somebody that's over all the provinces, and ultimately it might go all the way to the king. And then after the king, then it goes all the way to God. So there's always somebody higher, but you don't get any higher than God, see. So the point is that if you are responsible for these injustices and this imposition of detrimental effects on poor people, then you got to answer to somebody. It may be you have to answer to the people who voted for you the first time. Now, taking it out of the context of ancient Israel, but you got to answer to somebody. If you're not doing what you're supposed to be doing, then take them to court, you know, vote them out, impeach them, get rid of them. If we're doing something they're not supposed to be doing, then there's somebody that's over them that should hold them responsible, and there's somebody over them that should hold them responsible, and then ultimately at the head of the pyramid, of course, is God himself, who will hold everybody responsible. So don't do this. Don't let this happen. Then the next question. How is the king himself, number 2, how is the king himself served from the field? What does that have to do with anything?
Well, the land really belongs to God, and they're dependent, the king is dependent on people who go out and work the crops.
Exactly. Now, the king may look at himself. You know, I've used the illustration there in Luke chapter 16 where you got that dishonest steward, you know. And he makes the observation, once he's found out as being a crook, and he knows he's fixing to lose his job, and so he starts to think within himself, what can I do? He says, I cannot dig, and to beg I am ashamed. Now there's 2 options that he just cast aside immediately. Well, the first one, I can't dig. What is he saying? I can't dig. He doesn't know how a shovel works. Or has he been in the position that he's been in for so long that he's got soft and he can't use a shovel? He don't know how. It would kill him. Well, that could be it. That could be it. It could. So it's possible that the king here would look upon his underlings as doing menial tasks that he himself is not about to do. But let me tell you something. He's benefiting from what they're doing. He's eating from the same grain that they are out there slaving to pick. He's benefited from it too. And of course, this passage has been beat around, you know, trying to get at the essence of what's involved here. And obviously, that's the point that's there. But also, there may be involved in it as well. The better that king takes care of, treats the people that are under him, really the more prosperous the kingdom's going to be. Because you got a bunch of mad servants. If you got a bunch of people out here doing the menial task and they're upset and they feel like somebody's got their thumb on them all the time and trying to oppress them and won't take care of them, making them work too much overtime, not giving them days off, and all, then it's going to end up affecting the king in the long run. So you need to have happy citizens, because happy citizens are going to ensure that your particular reign as king is successful too. Now, if you take the other extreme, then you better not turn your back, because somebody might just take you out. If you got a bunch of mad citizens that you're oppressing. Now, is that not the way it's supposed to work? Well, sure it is. Is that the way it works, supposed to work in an employer-employee relationship too? You know? I mean, can you imagine you're an employer and all your employees, and I used to think they did this, they would stay up at night saying, what can we do tomorrow to really make them mad? Now, whether they did that or not, it sure came easy to them. Maybe they didn't have to plan. It's just natural. What can we do tomorrow? You know. And, of course, I've told you, there through one dry spot there, making boilers, you know, then we got to going backwards in our pay. We went from, they took $1 an hour away from us, and then 6 months later, they took another $1 an hour away from us. And I said, man, if we keep this up, we'll be able to get by on nothing. We're having to make all these changes in our life.
It's really a wonder they had anybody left after cuts like that.
I know it. And it was supposedly, you know, for a short time. And then you go from doing that kind of thing to working 70 hours a week. And then you're about dead because you're working that many hours. And they say, come on, we got to do more. Well, it shouldn't surprise you then that people are trying to find another job and get out from under that seemingly tyrant leadership, for sure. Well, does that happen in countries? Sure. That happens in family. That happens in congregations. That principle does. So it shouldn't surprise us then that Solomon is making note of it himself here. The king is served from the field just as much as anybody is. If anybody's eating bread, then the lowly person down here with his sickle and knocking over the stalks is a valuable commodity and needs to be looked upon that way as well. And this is along the same line with it as well here at number 3. How will the lover of silver be satisfied? Will the lover of silver be satisfied with silver? And then you can't just say yea or nay, you got to explain it. Will he? No. He won't. Well, why won't he? He always wants more. You know, and I've observed this. I've done this. Back there, another comparison from the boiler shop, you know, we would have not with the taking away $1 an hour and not with all that excess overtime that we was required to do, but about once a week we would get to, because I was on second shift, we would get to stay over and work on the furnace. And what we'd do, had a great big old furnace, and they'd bring DuPont pipes in there from Old Hickory up outside of Nashville, and we'd put them in our furnace there and melt the stuff out of them pipes, you know, making time and a half. Man, now here's the thing. You do that every week, you know what you do? You get used to that every week. As a matter of fact, you might even go out on a limb and buy a new car and depend on paying for that car with that overtime, and then all of a sudden, whoops, no overtime. I can't make ends meet. Wait a minute. You're just making ends meet before you worked all that overtime. But now you get used to the overtime. And so your standard of living progresses as you make more. And so that $200 turns to $300, and pretty soon $300 won't cut it. You need $400, and that won't do it. You need $500, and it just on and on and on you go. Because there's always something that you can buy. There's more stuff out there, and there's newer and better or whatever it is. And so there's that constant desire for more. The cycle never ends. Now, is that out of line with reality, or is that just exactly the way it is? That's just exactly the way it is. And it didn't take a genius in economics or anything like that. Solomon hit the nail on the head right here, 1,000 years before Christ. Amazing that. All right, number 4. How could and here's quotation, the abundance of the rich will not permit him to sleep? How could that be so?
Worried about losing what he got.
Exactly. I mean, you've got the picture here of here is a quote-unquote laboring man, okay? Here's a fellow who works with his hands. He's, from a bygone era, he's hauling hay, okay? He's stacking the hay up in the loft of the barn. He's doing all that. Do you think he has a hard time sleeping at night? Not hardly. Not hardly. Because all the things that the fellow who's got a whole lot of stuff would worry about, this poor fellow don't have to worry about it. Is he worried about somebody robbing the bank? Well, no, because he ain't got no money in the bank. He's worried about somebody breaking into his house and stealing all of his jewels. He ain't got no jewels. He don't have nothing that nobody else wants. And so he's not worried about the stock market crashing. He's just a regular laboring man, and so he's able to sleep just fine. But then all that he doesn't have, then the rich fella, he's got all that. And so at night he's laying there and says, man, stock exchange dropped how many points today? Did they say that we're to the bottom yet? No, not the bottom yet. Man, reckon how many people know I got 50 guns in here in my pocket, in my closet? Man, what if somebody breaks in? That word gets out. I'll have to get Ring doorbell, and I need to get me a guard dog. So he's all the time knows that he can have a tremendous problem because somebody might get his stuff. One of these new AR carrying IRS agents might be on his front porch pretty soon. Oh, horror of horrors. He can't sleep. He can't sleep. And of course, the reason why he can't sleep is because he's just living for the here and now. Should those things concern us? Well, sure. People would be foolish if it didn't concern you to a degree. That you look at your retirement and you realize, oh, okay, so I'm going to have to work till I'm 97. All right. I believe I can handle that. Yeah. But
If everybody would just, it wouldn't take but 1 year, if everybody would quit paying ridiculous prices for stuff, just that new car you're gonna buy, say, I'll wait another year. That house you got your eye on, I'll wait another year. Cut back on everything. Please don't drive so much, cut back on everything. It wouldn't take but 1 year, and then prices would drop like they drop.
And the thing is, that is happening right now, not by choice, but people are having to choose between post toasties and recreational activity, and post toasties is going to win out every time. You can actually survive without playing golf or going fishing. You can't survive without eating. So those decisions have to be made. So number 5 then, on top of the next page, how could riches be kept for their owner to his hurt? And that's a pretty general, broad question, but somewhere in the answer of it would get at for sure what Solomon is getting at. He's got a picture here of the who. Who is the picture of this individual? Is he a dirt poor fella? No, he's a prosperous man, isn't he? But for some reason, his prosperity is lost. His fortune comes upon some unforeseen circumstances that squash it, where he don't have it no more. Now, what could that be? Well, there's a bunch of things that could be. You know, it could be a turn in the stock market. It could be thieves. It could be, embezzling. I mean, there's all kinds of things that can happen to people. You know, one of the things that concerns me is how accessible all of your information is for somebody in Timbuktu to have the title to your house and sells it, and you didn't know anything about it until they come kick you out. That's what bothers me. Well, is that my fault for not buying TitleLock.com? Who knows? I don't know. But there's a lot of reverses in life that are unforeseen, obviously, or people would have planned better, that happens that can completely wipe out. Here it's called an evil travail, which simply means misadventure of some way. Did he invest in something? Did he invest with Bernie Madoff? And that's gone. You know, there's all kind of ways that you could use that. And then what would happen if that transpired? What about this prosperous fella who was sitting high on the hog for a while? What about his kids now? They ain't getting nothing. There ain't nothing for them to get. It's gone now. And so here's these poor children maybe who'd been on top of this for a long time and thought about what they was going to do and when they got there, and then now there's no inheritance. Well, that's not right. Well, of course it's not right. But what can you do about it? I mean, if you could tell the future, you'd be inspired. And you're not, and neither am I. So when you take the common everyday occurrences of life and you completely remove God and consequences from your action, then you are setting people up for where they are presently in this United States of America. They'll give their lives for some cause like, let's kill as many babies as we can by abortion. Let's shoot Supreme Court justices who do not vote in favor of killing more babies by abortion. And don't tell them what they'll do. So number 6 is the obvious conclusion. What do we leave this earth when we die? We don't have nothing. You know, this course reminds us of some of the statements that were made by Job. He came to this same conclusion. I didn't bring anything into the world, and I'm not going to carry anything out. And then that reminds us, of course, as well, of Paul's instruction to Timothy, having food and raiment, let us therewith be content. For we brought nothing in the world, and it's certain we'll take nothing out. Now, there's a prevailing theme throughout the Scripture. And, of course, the old joke, you know, as these two rich guys were standing at the coffin of another rich guy, and one of the rich guys said to the other rich guy, how much did he leave, do you think? The other said, every bit of it. And he did. He left every bit of it. Even though his wife did wrote a check, you know. Said, I want to die with all, I want to be buried with all my money. And so his wife wrote him a check of all his money and threw it in the. That's a joke. All right, number 7. According to Ecclesiastes chapter 5, verse 18 through 20, what does God give unto man? And he gives a list here. What does he give us? He gives us food. He gives us drink. He gives us the ability to enjoy the things that we do produce. I mean, what he says even if there was no ultimate punishment nor reward, then a person could take comfort in the fact that what they've produced they're being able to enjoy. But that's just icing on the cake for the child of God. That's not the main reason why he does what he does. Yesterday, they had Ladies' Day over at Saudi, you know, and so the men were supposed to clean up, okay, after it's over. Well, Clayton and Caden said, we're not men. So, now, the day before, they wanted to be, you know. And so then they started griping about, did they have to dress up to go over and clean up? And so I listened to him a while, and then Clayton said, it shouldn't matter what we wear, slaves that we are. I said, no, wait a minute, right there. You're not a slave. I said, let me tell you something. It doesn't matter whatever it is you got to do. Remember first, you're a slave or a servant to Christ, and then everything else takes its rightful position under that. To which Joel responded, preach on, brother. You know. And so they went and cleaned up. They were men whether they wanted to be or not after it's over. And that follows, you know, that's the significance of it. You know, if you're going, whatever you're going to do, then do it the best you can do so that you can have a good feeling about knowing that you did the best you could do. I mean, that just seems to me the principle of the Scripture, and certainly if you're going to do anything, why not just go ahead and do it right instead of doing it wrong 14 times? Now, it might take a little bit more effort, but why not just do the best you can do? All right, anything else on chapter number 5? All right. If there is none, chapter number 6, and we are speedily going right through this book. Let's read the first 2 verses. There is an evil which I have seen under the sun, and it is common among men, a man to whom God hath given riches, wealth, and honor, so that he wanteth nothing for his soul of all that he desireth. Yet God giveth him not power to eat thereof, but a stranger eateth it. This is vanity, and it is an evil disease. Okay? So here again, of course, this context will continue all the way to the end of this chapter relative to the oppression of poor people, the dishonesty that exists in the world, and the problem with money in and of itself. Okay? Here's a picture of an individual who is pictured as being resourceful, industrious. He's produced all this stuff. And then, lo and behold, he don't get to enjoy it. Now, could something like that actually happen? Well, it does all the time. You know, have you ever heard of people who work like a dog until they retired, and then after they retired, within a few short months, they were dead? How terrible. How terrible. Work all that time and not get to enjoy that 401k, not getting to go do all the things that you slaved to be able to do. That's not good. That's not right. That's a flaw in the universe.
The guy told me one time his daddy died while he was waiting on his first Social Security check. He worked all the way up to retirement, and he's waiting on the first check, and keep going.
Yeah. And you look at a situation like that, and of course, if you have the ability, then somebody says, well, I'm going to make sure that don't happen to me. I'm going to retire at 30. Well, more power to you. But you're going to have a hard time doing that, I dare say. But that's not a good thing. So there's all kinds of problems that could happen. It's possible whenever, say, take for example here a few weeks back when Russia went into Ukraine. Do you reckon there were any maybe pretty wealthy people lived in pretty big houses that ended up having to vacate the premises and leave? Well, you know they did. You know they did. So did they bring that on themselves? Was that something that happened that removed them from having access to all this stuff? Well, sure it happened. You know, at the same time, there are a lot of people living on the border who now have to fix their fence every day because thousands of people are climbing over it, coming into the country. And so they're spending more money than they should on new barbed wire. Well, that ain't right. There ain't nothing right without God. Nothing. There is no right or wrong. That's not wrong. Nothing's wrong. And of course, at the same time, if nothing's wrong, then nothing's right. If you don't have the anchor of God's objective standard in His Word. That's it. Without God, everything is allowed. And sadly, that's where some people think we are presently, because that's what they're doing, anything and everything they want to do. So in this picture here, what evil does the author mention here in chapter 6, verse 2? This fellow who is not able to enjoy the things that he has. It's a grievous, grievous evil. Now, I meant to say something about this over here. We're going to run out of time anyhow. But we were just talking about sleep a while ago. There were some points there that I wanted to make about how that the fellow that labors has the ability to sleep better than the person who's got a lot of stuff and he's worried about losing it, okay? And another point that I read was that the poor man, and it's mentioned in the text too, or the common laborer, even though he may not go to sleep with a full belly, he still sleeps better. Whereas if you're up late at night and you have the resources to eat cake and ice cream and corn dogs and everything else before you go to bed, then you might not sleep good because of your digestive system too. That might. And so even the benefit of a limited diet assists the common laborer in being able to sleep, whereas it might be detrimental to the person who has all the delicacies of life to eat. It might mess with his sleeping too. Well, we're going to stop right there where the bell's fixing to go off, and I'm going to let you have a few extra seconds to go to the little boys, little girls' room. Any comment, any question? All right, we'll start right here Wednesday night, Lord willing. No, we won't. We won't do it Wednesday night. Have to be next Sunday.